I worked myself to the bone, worked, ground, dust. Everyone was just fried. And you only do that if you want to do it. I'm extraordinarily lucky. There's so many things that can go wrong. Obviously, you have to have a value to bring to the table. Numerically, more people are going to be employees than founders. If you own 10% of a company that has a $100 million exit, you don't need a $50 billion exit. Think different, come up with something that's like vastly original, have a great team, take care of people, and by taking pride in what you do and working really hard and making something that you're proud of, typically means that your customers are going to like.
You're by and large retired, right? Like,
yes.
How does that feel? Jonathan, you were a early employee at Snowflake. What was that defining moment you knew you guys were onto something?
I think it was probably kind of after my mental matrix of like timing is really around funding rounds. So I'd say like sometime after the Series C, Bob Muglia was still the CEO, and company was probably a couple hundred, and it was like eighth triple of a quarter of in terms of revenue growth a year. Then head sales guy Chris Degnan, who just recently stepped down as a chief revenue officer, we just ended up calling him Chief Sandbagger because he would just like constantly hit his numbers. But it was at the point where it had just been so many times that revenue had tripled that if you extrapolated the growth rate and there was a consistent track record of hitting that, it's not like it was one or two, then it started to become clear that the company was probably going to cross the chasm, as I think some people call it. Frank Slootman referenced that in one of his little books about his time at the company. We figured that we were going to cross it, but I don't think anyone really realized. Many of us underviewed how big it would get. We figured that, yeah, like it would get somewhere, and as employees that there'd be some sort of exit, but only a few. I know a couple finance guys that were like, dude, you're undervaluing this. And I was like, really? Because this seems like we're going to do fine. He's like, no, dude, you're going to do great. So that was, but it was probably like 4 to 5 years in.
What I like to call the bubble, right? You're in this bubble. You don't know what's happening. You don't know how people perceive it. And sometimes that could work positively or negatively. You might think you're doing too good, or you might be doing too bad. What you described there is you don't sort of realize the potential, the real potential of what's happening. But that consistent growth, was it happening on a monthly basis, on a quarterly basis? You know, when you talk about the triple growth, how quickly was that happening?
I mean, I think technically, my recollection is that we really talked about that stuff quarterly. If it was consistent quarter over quarter, exactly, I don't know. Annually, definitely, when we do a review. And it took a couple years to get that going. Obviously, it started, there was zero revenue when I started. There was zero customers. So it started from nothing and then just continued out from that. But the sales growth was great. And then it's all these financial metrics as you go through the company. And I think what helped the valuation when entry into the public market happened, which is revenue growth for existing customers. So it was like new customer acquisition was great, but we had incredible retention, and existing customers would just like keep doubling, let alone going to land some new marquee account. And so it was kind of these two factors on top of each other, which really drove this insane growth rate. But it was like from memory, the metrics around existing customer revenue growth were just absolutely unprecedented in terms of like something like a SaaS or software delivery model.
So take you back to the beginning. When you first joined Snowflake, how did that happen?
I got called by a recruiter, something familiar to you. It was a guy named Stuart that I had crossed paths with. I had done a large number of, I would say, like smaller startups in San Francisco, not really down the Bay. And I believe I had worked with this guy at Naval Ravikant's last company before he did AngelList, which was called Vast, which never really went anywhere. But had really high Amazon usage for the time. So that would be very early, like 2011. By our metrics, we had 6% of all S3 objects at one point, not storage, but just in terms of like usage, some like early signs of scale around Amazon. And
Mhm.
this recruiter had been given a task to find cloud related infrastructure or scaling startup people. And so he gave
Mhm.
me a call, and I was basically like on my way out at Lucasfilm. I was working at LucasArts, which
Mhm.
was the game division that Disney basically killed once they acquired the company. I'd only been there a very short time, just under a year, and basically everybody got laid off. Funny little side stories. I tried to stay and work for ILM under Kim Labrie, who eventually left Lucasfilm to be CTO of Epic Games. And if you've watched like The Mandalorian or any of these shows they talk about, it's like the vault. I forget that it's like this giant room that they have, and then
Mhm.
the actors are in the room, and then the set is projected behind them.
Mhm.
That's all powered by this stuff that Kim really envisioned with George while they were at Lucasfilm, and they had this whole project with ILM people and the game people and using the game engine. So all that stuff that you see in this expanse, I think it's called, is rendered by Unreal. Anyway, all this crazy stuff, and I was going to work with Kim to basically update ILM's render pipeline and move it onto the cloud and do all this cool stuff. But Disney HR had me marked as being like terminated or targeted to be laid off. And so this guy who like won Oscars couldn't get me on laid off. But like had I had the chance, I definitely would have just continued that.
Mm.
But I went to my boss and I was like, dude, I'm miserable. And he's like, we're all about to be laid off. You need to go find a job. And so I started looking for a job, and Stuart called, and then I went down to interview, and I had specifically was like, I should do something outside of San Francisco proper and do something that was like infrastructure focused, had a possibility for like a really big market, and not necessarily just like a technology on top of some sort of consumer app. And so Snowflake ran all those bills. They were in San Mateo, which is about as far as I really wanted to drive,
Mhm.
and just went down and started interviewing and somehow pulled it off.
So when you arrived, how big was Snowflake?
I was the 13th hire. There was like the founders, some founding engineers that the founders brought with them from Oracle, 3 or 4 of those, and they really built the core engine like
Mhm.
from scratch on their own, which is like if you're into databases is complete insanity. And then they brought in Marcin Zukowski, who they brought in as a founder. He had built a database called VectorWise and was a super hardcore high performance database guy. And then about 6 months goes by, and then they started another round of hiring, mostly all database PhDs, and then me.
And this would have been incubating inside SHV's office, right?
I don't really know how much incubation there were. I mean, this is like secondhand for me, but Mike Spicer had met Benoit and Thierry. I don't know. I think he had met Benoit first. And then Sutter and Mike put up some seed money. I think it went pretty quickly. It's not like they were like an entrepreneur in residence and worked there for a little while and came up with an idea. Mike and Benoit found each other and
Right.
basically kind of had the same idea. And Benoit and Thierry had been wanting to do something like Snowflake inside Oracle and obviously couldn't. They were at the top level. Like you couldn't be a bigger dog in the engineering universe at Oracle than those two. And they had the whole thing in their heads. And then they started out like I think in Thierry's garage or something. And then at some point, probably about 6 months before I started, they got this little baby, I call it Class C office space in San Mateo. It was kind of a dump, but it was like actually like awesome, like old building, red brick walls, a ratty carpet, nasty bathroom, perfect little startup spot, lots of coffee shops and food right outside the door.
I think at the end of the day, that's like the common story, right? The garage, that sort of setup seems to be a common thread with
Oh, I
most.
mean, yeah, obviously you go back to like the HP.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's like it's perfect. They just needed some space to basically build their little prototype, and once they had really enough traction, they went back to Sutter with basically they did a proof of concept that executed on Amazon, but it was very like static
Mm,
configuration, so that they had kind of like gone through the console, built what they needed, had a few virtual machines. That was all built by the security architect Peter Pavinek. Then they did a demo for Sutter to show them that everything could work, and like ran a query on objects in S3, pulled it to an EC2 machine, ran some compute, and then Sutter closed the Series A. And then I think I got again a week after that, and then it was like full off to the races. So they knew that they had a prototype, they knew they had something that would work, and then
mm,
they had to build it. And so then I came in with sort of a class of early engineers, and then it was just like straight, here's this thing, we need to build a product around it, we need to build some sort of service that we can get a trial customer. Chris
mhm,
Degnan, the revenue guy, was there. He's just grinding cold calling with these two good Tom Malloy and Jordan Vanderbilt. Both of those two guys are still there, I think, which is amazing because it's like 10 years later. And they just cold called. So we were all building, trying to make the product work. And these guys were just literally hammering phones, like old school sales stuff,
mhm,
trying to find any customer that basically we could give the product to for free to try out.
mhm.
And they found a ad tech company.
Yeah.
And then by that point, we had like a very rudimentary service that was on Amazon.
So when you joined, there weren't any customers.
Zero. No, 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 no. There was, I mean, there was like the product, there was the idea. There was also Redshift,
Mhm,
which that came out before I started. So, I mean, it's sort of insane. The founders are crazy people, but they also knew in the database universe, Redshift was a database product called Parcel. The core thing with a lot of like Hadoop like databases and Parcel is like you'd load your data on, it would run on multiple machines, and your data would be partitioned across those machines. So let's say you had like 1 terabyte drive in 4 machines,
mhm,
and let's say that there's no backup, just to make the math easy. You've got 4 terabytes of data, and there's some partitioning scheme that the data gets split apart. And if you want to run the query, you can only use CPUs that are next to the data.
mhm,
And then if you want to expand your cluster or shrink your cluster, you got to move that data. And this is also, SSDs are new, which I know is crazy, or at least SSDs at like large size were really financially not feasible.
mhm,
And so that data movement was really slow. And then you couldn't run a lot of queries while you were resizing. And so Parcel inherited all of these problems architecturally, which Snowflake didn't. That was their whole genius, was that data lives cold in S3. You kind of have a one-time cache hit, you pull it onto a machine, and then you run. While they were in sort of the seed stage, Redshift happened, and they were like, you know what, this isn't the greatest product. Our original product marketing guy, John Bach, was like, really, you don't have to be that worried about it because they're going to run into all of these different performance issues, which they did. And so even as Snowflake was a tiny company, we were able to displace and convert Redshift customers because they would just run into these scaling concerns. But in hindsight, if you think about it without knowing the under hood details, it's insanity to think that like a tiny little startup of under 20 people is going to build something to compete with a branded Amazon product. But that's exactly what they did.
What was so unique about that journey? Because you spent from that point as one of the early employees before a single customer to the company going public. Anyone I speak with now knows Snowflake, know the success of Snowflake, and being the biggest software IPO is a huge feat. As somebody who was there as one of the early members of the team before a single customer, what were the unique things that made Snowflake special? I'm not just talking about the product and the technology, but was there something special and unique about the people?
Oh, I mean, absolutely. And it sounds, I thought about this kind of before we're recording now, is it sounds super cliche. Read like all these startup books, or you like listen to startup people on Twitter, or you go to talks. It's like the team and the 10x engineer and like the collaboration, but it's a cliche because it's true. And I think like anyone in the startup universe that's built a company, doesn't even need to be a technical company, but there's a real magic when you have a small group of people that are extraordinarily skilled. And I was the least educated person in the room. So like I was walking around with literal luminaries in their field, but also were people that were able to collaborate with others, had a strong work ethic, believed in what they were doing, put in the hours, communicated well, were responsible. Given a task, you'd execute it because you felt like you had an obligation to the team to like not hold people back. That was evident from the day I walked in the door. And it really was electric. Like the first year that I was there, I've always said it's like the most fun I've ever had, like outs in a professional environment. Like hands down, nothing comes close. And I've done actually some kind of cool stuff. And we had no success. It's not like we were like killing it. It was just the building. And there are people that can just absolutely write savagely brilliant software. And oftentimes they're complete characters, like absolute Fruit Loops. But they write, there's like the file storage code was written by this guy Vadim, and as far as I know, I mean, I haven't worked there for years, but I'd assume that a lot of that stuff's still there because it's very foundational. It was very performant. People were thinking ahead. Like one of my favorite things was that one of the database performance engineers, Philip Underbrunter, who went on to do Observe, which was another Sutter company, put in, it was basically, this is like outside of my like realm of performance engineering, but it was support for an AVX 512 instruction. So like an Intel vectorized, if you get 512 bytes in an array, use this instruction to do math on it than just doing it normal. So it's like a vector acceleration. AVX 512 didn't exist at that point, but he knew it was coming. And so he just like put it in. And I remember seeing the commit. And I was just like, I somewhere have a screenshot of it. I was like, this is probably coming in 2 years. And he's like, yeah, but then it's just there and it'll run. These sets of instructions will literally run twice as fast for free. It's people that are like thinking like that.
Mm.
There's all this product stuff, but it really is, you hire adults. One of the things that really sold me on the company when I joined is that I think I was exactly the mean age. So I was early 30s. I won't do that like time math in my head right now. A lot of the founders were in their 40s. They had kids. I had a kid. I had like a baby. A few young people, but like mostly people in their 30s and 40s that had like been there and like had a job. And I'm not saying obviously there's like a billion stories of Silicon Valley 20-year-olds that just like grind all day and night. But it was great for me because I was around people my age, people that succeeded, people that had built things that failed and had learned from that.
Mm.
So that's one interesting takeaway is like we were all like ancient people for Silicon Valley. I mean, the founders were in their 40s. I mean, it was like normally you'd think about just putting them out to pasture. So people watching this, the takeaway is like you're not dead in Silicon Valley when you're 35 or 40. You know, you can still do great things.
Well, I think that's it. I think there's an element of, as you called it, maturity, and I think it's just experience, right? Having been through it once, twice, failed, succeeded, failed again, and bringing that collection of individuals together. And the reason I wanted to index on that is because the product is great, but at the end of the day, what makes the product great is the people, right? There's conviction and belief, and as you said, a sense of responsibility to each other.
Well, and the customer. What you're saying, what that leads to is serving your customer and really taking pride in what you do.
Yeah.
Which is if you're an Amazon Web Services follower, that's what they do. I mean, like, company-wide, but like they walk that talk at Amazon. I'd like to think that Snowflake did the same thing. And
Mhm.
by taking pride in what you do and working really hard and making something that you're proud of, typically means that your customers are going to like. And if you have low enough ego, at least in terms of like listening to feedback, and you can listen to your customers and you know that you don't have all the answers, then you can pivot, reprioritize your roadmap for what your customers need. And then that's when you get that growth. But I think there's people that not the right product market fit, or they just think that they're right and the product doesn't take off. But there has to be a lot of humility and a lot of like the customer's right and we're not. And there is a point. Obviously, customers are going to ask for features that are a bad idea, but like spiritually, generally speaking, without like violating your core design, you got to listen to them.
As a recruiter in Silicon Valley, I'll tell you is it's the average tenure isn't 8 years, right? It's
Oh,
unique.
my average tenure is like 2.
So what kept you there? What kept you all those years committed to it and seeing it through?
I mean, it was hard. I'll tell you that. Like a lot of the hardness was my own fault and my own like not kind of scaling my own team fast enough and getting stuff on my plate. So that's like it's not the company's problem, but at first it was just clear that it was something very special. Technical for me from like an engineering and like infrastructure perspective, the scale that we were working at was the largest that I had ever done and incredibly interesting from a network storage compute perspective, all the network security stuff that we had to handle, then starting to do multi-cloud when no one was really doing that from like it would be impossible for me in like at that time to have really found something with the same level of technical interest without being at a huge company. And I do not do well like huge teams and big companies and like just like morass bureaucracy. Once Snowflake started hitting a couple thousand people, like for me personally, it was just like the bureaucracy and everything slowing down started to kind of irritate me. But that's a law of large organizations. That's not at all a company issue
Hmm.
by any means. But for to be at a company that wasn't like Google side, I would have like organ rejection at like a Google or then Facebook or Meta. It wouldn't work for me. So technical scope, interest, impact, the team, and then obviously for everyone you're working, there's an economic component. So I had a little spreadsheet which I still have my own little Google Drive thing, and it was like basically like what do you get at the end after taxes, all in? And I was like, dude, if we got $15 a share, I'm gonna be set. And obviously it
Wow.
was more than, and I think 15 was like the big number. I'm like, ooh, we might hit 15. So there's a
So
economic upside.
that's absolutely true. And not to sort of divulge into the actual figures, and I that's not what we're going to do here, but it was life changing money, right?
Oh yeah. I mean, absolutely. Everyone that started when I did, it was life changing. Strike price was extraordinarily low. Like our office manager, Nancy, who's a like office mom, and I mean that in like the best way. Like she had a pivotal role to play with the company and our success and taking care of all of us. Like she did great. And it's like again, it's like it's a little bit of a Silicon Valley trope, but it's true. And that's the upside. If you're like engineers that are listening to this, like get in early. That's where the fun is. There's way more risk. There's way more reward. I think that's really where the magic happens. You join a mid-stage, share price is going to be higher. It's lower risk for you, so the company is not going to offer you as much equity. But if you're in at the beginning, and or do something on your own. Snowflake is such an anomaly from
Hmm.
like a market exit perspective that like people definitely shouldn't over index on that. And I feel
Yep.
incredibly lucky. But like if you own 10% of a company that has a $100 million exit, you don't need a $50 billion exit. You just have a material piece of equity and you can have a smaller exit. And especially what you can build with tools these days, you can take the productivity of one person and really multiply that. So
Hmm.
you can build something amazing with an incredibly small team, and you don't need these huge exits. But going back to what you were talking about, which is retention, have a great team, take care of people. I would say that every single leader at Snowflake had a strong ethical compass. And that was from Mike Spicer, who was our first CEO. One notable thing is that the founders were not the CEO, and they did that on purpose.
Hmm.
They They didn't feel like that was their wheelhouse. I think that that's a mistake a lot of people that found companies do, is that they want to be CEO. Oftentimes, I think for the wrong reasons. I think it's because of ego and not because they're going to be the best at it
Hmm.
or a sense of control. I do think that was a major factor in Snowflake's success. I mean, it was a strong contributing factor, maybe not major factor.
Yep.
And that leadership was very human focused and very real. Like, obviously, if you weren't doing good, they would tell you, but there was not a culture of like being a jerk to people. Bob Moogly, our CEO for the longest time that I was there, I
Hmm.
think in tenure, still the longest one, incredibly humanistic leader. And that was a huge part. So I was high enough up the food chain that I would have skip in Microsoft speak a skip level with Bob. So I'd get to talk to him and he'd give you a little tough love if you needed it, but he'd also like pump you up. And that was a big thing that I think kept me there and I think is missing from a lot of companies. And I'm not saying that you have to like just candy coat people and like give them all the hugs and like
Hmm.
all these affirmations, but like just be a decent person as a leader and be clear and be honest when it's good and bad, and that keep that honesty specific and
Hmm.
keep the drama out of it. You'll keep people. And I'm sure you know this as a recruiter. You hear all the stories of people don't leave companies, they leave bad managers. I think that the Snowflake leadership culture was definitely, especially at the early size, because there were so few, in a book that worked for me.
Because there's only ever been four CEOs of Snowflake, right? Mike Spicer, Bob, Frank, and today's CEO. So for a company that's been around for 10 years, it's as if the transitions from one CEO to another was by design in many ways to prepare the company for the next stage.
Yeah, I mean, that's my recollection. I think there was a lot of stories about Bob's exit and Frank's entry, which were above my pay grade. But I think the Frank in interviews and has talked about just being able to get the company ready for an IPO and driving it through because Frank had a track record of that. From an engineering perspective, Frank left engineering alone because the founders had that piece.
Hmm.
And that's like one of these like second order impacts of having your founding team be the engineering leaders,
Hmm.
that kind of gets lost, but I think it was very material. So Frank came in, he made a lot of changes, but the by and large did not include engineering, though
Hmm.
we were all terrified for like 3 days. Um, I
Why?
mean, like literally, like if you saw Frank in the like our team shared a floor with Frank. We were the only team that was like not on the main engineering floor, and like
Mm.
went in there one day and he was like, we had Nespressos because Benoit liked them. We had like drip coffee and then like some other coffee machine that we had got, but Benoit didn't like those. So we had the Nespressos again. And Frank was in there apoplectic with rage that there were 3 coffee options, which as the operator that he is kind of made sense. And I like tried to give a little explanation on why. And I was like, you just need to shut up and get out of the room. Like I was like, literally, we were terrified of him from a continuity perspective and sort of product development. There was not that Frank coming in was not a huge
Hmm.
deal for us, which
What
I
was?
think also helped. It helped the company, or at least
Yeah.
the engineering and the velocity that those leadership transitions sometimes can kind of slow things down.
Did you get to be under sort of the leadership of all four CEOs, or was it just Bob and Frank?
Oh, Frank spoke to me like 3 times. Um, Frank was not interested in me or what I was doing. The finance team, yes, and sort of Frank brought in Mike Scarpelli, who I have a lot of respect for. Absolutely savage cost cutter finder, not to be trifled with. But obviously, the cloud expenses were a vast portion of the money going out the door. And so there
Hmm.
was a lot of interest in what our team was doing because really that spend by and large outside of like data storage, which customers starting to get paid for directly. So it wasn't necessarily a margin issue, but like cost of compute was in our universe and Mike wanted to know. But Frank really wasn't interested in engineering outside of like the direct executive level. He was like, and this is what good leaders do. It's like, okay, you're in charge of this, go deal with it. Frank was on sales and legal and marketing and all the other stuff and the road show, but he didn't, yeah, no talking to Frank.
So, Jonathan, there's an element of fate in today's recording, every,
Huge.
right?
Yeah.
Because I think you mentioned something at the start of this, and I think you've got a lot more to mention. But there's a bit of timeless fate in the fact that you happen to be in your childhood bedroom.
I did Unix stuff in here on my Atari through a BBS. There's some lineage here of nerdness.
Because you're by and large retired, right? Like,
Yes.
how does that feel?
It feels, I mean, it feels great. Not gonna lie. I feel very lucky. Feel imposter syndrome that like that's there. I could have kept working. I needed to be around my kids and help out my sort of like life situation. And so it was kind of a difficult call. I still think about it. Was that the right one? And then I like have awesome time with my kids. It makes it all worth it. It's super weird. Now I've said to the internet that I am retired. It is implied on my LinkedIn, which somehow recruiters don't get. I'm like, they call me all and they're like, hey, are you happy at Snowflake? I was like, it's clearly in my data on LinkedIn that I do not work there.
I mean, the reason I bring this up, right? So you're in your childhood bedroom. We've prepped this call a couple times. Well, prepped this podcast a couple times at your own home, and you
Yeah.
just happen to be there today. And you are here. You've had this huge success. You were part of one of Silicon Valley's biggest success stories. A lot of our listeners are founders, future founders, investors, potential early adopters, and talent, engineering talent. And this particular podcast, Inside Silicon Mind, is built on this idea of getting into the mindset of the companies that have been built, the engineering talent, and how all these questions I ask you about what it takes to build something amazing. All of us, whether you're in engineering or you're in Silicon Valley or not, aspire to get to a point where you've been part of a success story and you get to be in this position that you're in right now where you don't need to work anymore. You can if you want, but you've had this huge amount of success. What does it take to get to this position in life? Like, what to give people advice, and not to say that everyone wants to retire. Some people would like to keep going on, but to be in a position where you work out of choice rather than necessity and needing to work. What skills does someone need to have? What sort of mindset? We talk about grit a lot. There's a lot of self-help books out there. One of the reasons I really wanted to have you on the show is because you've been part of a huge success story. And you and I have had this conversation. I used to say, well, you're one of the founding engineers, and you like to correct me and say, no, I'm one of the early employees.
Yeah. Early, not founding.
That's it. So this is a key point, right? So you're not the founder, you're not the founding engineer, you're one of the early employees, but you're in this amazing, unique position. If you were to look back now in hindsight, what were the key attributes, skills, opportunities, whatever it was, luck that got you here?
Obviously, you have to have a skill set. You have to have a value to bring to the table. And I think more out of luck than design. I was kind of used to call myself a generalist. Lots of skills, mastered none. But in my domain, which is everyone has a different domain, I had network security, scaling, Amazon, operating systems, able to write enough code to like be semi-useful, and a lot of startup experience, a lot of diagnostic, like why are things breaking experience, and that fit. I had sort of a unique set of skills. At least, I mean, I don't know, they hired me, they didn't hire someone else. So still sometimes a little confused by that. But for your listener, you got to have something that people don't have, and then enough to get noticed. And then you as the either as a founder, which I can't really speak to, you obviously need to have an idea that's genius. I think numerically more people are going to be employees than founders. I would encourage you be bold and find some friends and found a company. There's a lot of agency in that. But if you're an employee, you have to be very, very careful about where you're going, and is that company going to get you where you want? And I had gone down startups that didn't succeed road enough times. I got my first piece of stock in 1996. None of them worked out. A couple times they like almost did. Wouldn't have been like Snowflake huge, but it would have been an exit. Obviously, it would have been like in the Bay Area, anything that can get you to the point that you can put a down payment on a home at this point is like a life-changing success. So like I missed those. I had careful reflection about what went wrong. And so I had some specific criteria for something that I was going to do again after my stint in like Corporateville, which was Lucasfilm pre-Disney. I started there, but that obviously I wasn't getting equity. George Lucas had 100% of that company, so you got your salary, but it was so awesome to work there. That was a really cool place to work for while it was there, but that wasn't going to be life changing. And so when I like left that little safe bubble, I was like, it needs to have a huge TAM. So like the company can grow into something. It needs to be a culture that you're into. It needs to be something that you like doing, and you need to have enough equity when you join that after it dilutes like 1,000 times from all the funding rounds, there's still something left. And you need to like that culture. And so it was definitely a two-way fit. You have to be intentional as an early employee and do the math. Like
Mm,
literally did the math. I was like, okay, well, they gave me this much stock. Let's say it gets diluted down to like 20% of that percentage of whatever
mm,
piece of the company that you have, which is a tiny fraction of a percent, but like it's all numbers. So that gets diluted out. And then there's a possible exit at, okay, it's the company grows to be $100 million company and you get a 10x multiplier. So it's worth $1 billion. So you take $1 billion times your piece and then basically cut that in half, give the rest to Uncle Sam in the state of California, and that's what you get. But you have to do that ahead of time, and then you know what you're investing into. Don't just like roll into it and just be like, okay, they gave me this, I'm just going to go. But the TAM piece was a huge selling piece for Snowflake. And I vividly remember thinking about that. And they were like, okay, well, it's a $15 billion addressable market at the time in 2013. Lord knows what it is now. So you're like, okay, so this company needs to get like 2% of a market and I'm rich. Like that's an achievable goal. Like that's being smart as a potential employee about what you're going to go do, or obviously the founding team. But it's like the market was so huge that Snowflake could have taken 1%, 2% of the market and been a massive company.
What do you think the TAM is today?
Oh, I mean, I don't know. It's got to be many times that. I would say it was growing because the initial genesis was just data warehousing. There's like transactional support in the Snowflake system now. There's all this AI stuff that like I don't know anything about. Like I don't have engineering conversations with anyone because I don't want to have to get encumbered in selling stuff. So I have like no idea under the hood how this stuff works except the public market. But like what the whole AI piece does to the TAM, I have no idea. But just the amount of data that there is so huge. So I mean, Snowflake still has a huge amount to grow. But at the time, $15 billion for a company to enter into a market that big. That's probably, if I have to distill everything out, it's like, okay, like you're an employee or a founder and you want to pick a winner. Go into a big market with a bunch of ossified competition that hasn't put out a new interesting product in like a decade and a half. And that's exactly the situation that they were in. So it was like huge market. Solutions didn't really work for what people wanted. All of this stuff at the time, I was like, wow, this sounds like a really good idea. I had done some data warehousing before. I knew enough to know that like there was a real issue. Their proposed architecture was radically different, could scale in ways that just everything else couldn't. So it was like, great idea, huge market. You got to take a couple percent and winner, winner, chicken dinner. So that's really the advice.
Let's just go back to that original question, right, and unpack it slightly because the skills, the value that you bring, of course, that's what got you the job, right? And you're there and you're adding value and you're maintaining that value to keep the position ultimately, right? Because you're successful because of it. But despite all of that, this story doesn't happen every day.
Oh
And
yeah.
as a recruiter, me and my team speak to engineers all the time that a lot of it is to kind of explain to them the potential opportunity with a startup where we talk about the TAM, the problem statement, the use case, the founder background, the investors. What sort of advice would you give to a 25-year-old or 26-year-old, 27-year-old engineer, Stanford graduate, been at a couple of companies, and there's a potential opportunity to join a startup today with a huge TAM, right? Let's give it a $15 billion TAM. Great founders, great VCs, Mike Spizer's there, Sutter Hill there, but they're unsure. They're unsure because they don't want to take the risk of a startup.
That's more of like a philosophical question. At risk of sounding like a little glib, it's like, what do you want to do with your life? Like, do you want an adventure? Go work at a startup. Do you want a lifestyle job? Find like some sort of like services company that maybe isn't technical, and you can do like technical work there, and you can go clock in for 6 hours and then leave, or go work for Google, be like a upper middle manager at Google and work like 8 hours a week and get like $500,000 a year. There's different options, but it's like, really, what do you want? I wanted something fun. I like the adventure. I like the rush of building things. And I wanted to get a nest egg for myself and my family. And so the startup was the only way really that I could kind of figure out to do that. Like, I don't, short of founding something. So it's like, if someone's got like this great option on the table and
Mhm.
they don't know if they want to do it, it's, you have to want to do it. You know, we all worked hard. Like, I worked myself to the bone, and so did I mean the bone, I mean the bone. Like, I mean, worked, ground, like dust. Everyone was just fried. And you only do that if you want to do it.
And
And
you believe in what
you
you're building.
believe in it. But if you don't have that, like, God, it's so cheesy, but it's like the kind of the fire in your belly that you want to go like into the unknown, and you want
Mhm.
to make something. Probably don't do it, because you're going to get organ rejection,
Mm.
like by the company.
I love that. Organ rejection.
Going back to like when you're like those early times at Snowflake, like every single person there was there to grind and
Mm.
build. And when you've got that united front
Mm.
and like that shared vision and purpose, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. Like, if you're a new engineer and you've got this option to join a startup, you're not pumped about it. Like, you're not pumped about like going to make something new. I mean, my advice would be like, you then, have some deep reflection and
Mhm.
figure out, what do you want to do? You're
Mhm.
25, like, you got time to make mistakes. I didn't do Snowflake until I was in my 30s. And I worked on a lot of cool companies that didn't necessarily go anywhere, and I had a great time doing it.
And you
And
have no regrets, right? Like those opportunities that didn't go anywhere. There's no regrets there.
I mean, no, not really. I mean, I a lot of fun, like driving around Serbia with like my Serbian team, and rigged up a Wi-Fi antenna on top of like a hotel in downtown New York. And my coworker was bribing people at Javits to put an antenna on their roof and made the internet work. I mean, all kinds of stories. I had tons of fun. But you have to do something that excites you and that you want to do. And some people, I don't want to be dismissive, like the idea of going to work for Google sounds great, and they're really fired up about that, and that's what they should do. And if you want to build something new and
Mhm.
have a gamble and potentially get a big payoff, then you should do startup land.
The whole rest invest thing. I love watching the sitcom A Startup. Sorry, Silicon Valley. Apologies. It's called Silicon Valley. It's about a startup. I'm sure you've seen it, and I can see that being a reality for so many engineers who, and there's nothing wrong with it at all. Like that's just what you want to do, and I get it. But it is truly magical, right? I've surrounded my whole career around founders and VCs and engineers who have built incredible companies, and very few of them actually have huge successes. Most of them are,
Oh,
unfortunately,
it's just littered with failure. I mean,
yeah.
there's so many things that can go wrong.
Mm.
I mean, I'm extraordinarily lucky. But you also, like, after you get all those failures, like, you get a little bit of a spidey sense, like, if you're paying attention.
Mm.
And my spidey sense when I started Snowflake was ding, ding, ding. Like, I was like basically single income, took a pay cut to work there. I mean, for the Bay Area, I was doing great, but like, I had like zero in my bank account every month. Like, all the money came in right out the door: mortgage, kids, childcare, groceries. I had a $5,000 car that broke down all the time. I was not like making a huge amount of money, but it was that what you could see in the future. And it was worth taking that gamble because talking to the founders, talking to Mike interviewed me at the Sutter Hill office, which was definitely, that was a strong sales pitch. I know enough Silicon Valley history. I was like, oh yeah, these guys are, he talked about it at the time. He's like, yeah, we're an evergreen fund and we don't have to sell our stuff and we still hold all our NVIDIA stock. This was like when NVIDIA was like, 1/16th what it is today. Lord knows if they still have that position, but these guys are legends when you get to go in. But the pitch on the company, the technology, the idea, the radical thinking about it, my spidey sense after all of these failures was like, this is worth investing in.
You mentioned luck, but I believe in it. It's a cliche, but nothing that I've coined. But luck is when hard work meets opportunity, right?
That was the position everyone was in, the founders included. They met someone willing to finance their crazy idea that they couldn't do at Oracle. They had the preparation, they had the hard work, and they met the right guy that believed in them and gave them the latitude, all the way down. I had worked hard, done all these startups. I had the relevant skills.
But there wasn't the opportunity. You had that. And that's the point I was trying to get to, Jonathan, is that all those prior jobs you had in your 20s, that hard work, that skill, that talent, that grit was always there. Just the opportunity wasn't there. And then you landed this opportunity. It's there. And that's when your hard work and the opportunity married itself together, and you have what people say an overnight success, but it's really, as you said, it's tough. It's
oh yeah,
a lot of sleepless nights, I bet, and a lot of hours put in.
The other thing that I think was very different that I thought about was not doing a technology company opportunity that was derivative. Don't do, we're X for Y. We're, something like this, but like we're like DoorDash, but for this market or something. Like if you hear that phrase,
yeah,
I mean, if they want to give you 20% of the company, then great, you should go do that. You'll come out because your exit's not going to be huge. And there's always exceptions to the rule. Mike Speiser talks a lot about not doing B2C companies, business to consumer, much more fickle. So like enterprise focused companies, if you're selling to businesses, I think your probability for success is a little better. So there are two things: not a consumer company, that was kind of on purpose, and then someone that was doing something completely different. There was a lot of talk about first principles thinking, like, why are we going to do it this way? Why has it been done this way in the past? Is that really the right solution? And so as a potential employee or founder, like, don't do something derivative. I mean, that's like, if you want to take away lessons from the Snowflake story that aren't immediately obvious, think different, come up with something that's like vastly original. And if you're gonna do a consumer company, you're really taking on a lot of additional risk. Huge upside. Your TAMs often are going to be even bigger. So those were kind of two, after all of these failures that I had, those two things stood out. And so when they gave me the whole "this is Snowflake" spiel, I was like, okay, major upsides are you're selling to businesses, you're selling them a product that they desperately want because everything on the market kind of sucks unless you're paying like top dog Oracle money, and you've got a long sales cycle, but once you get people, they're sticky. Consumers, it's a lot more about marketing, and you've got a lot of upfront investment to like kind of get that traction.
It's been great having you on the show.
Awesome. Pleasure.
I honestly, I learned a lot, and I know you and I have been talking about doing this for a while, so I'm glad we finally managed to do it. And as I said, fate has you in your childhood bedroom, so talking about the success of Snowflake, which is amazing. Last question. We like to end each episode on a tradition on the inside of the Silicon Mind, which is a book recommendation. I'm an avid reader. I love reading, so for the most part, you're doing it with the readers, but part of me, selfishly, I'd love to know as well. Is there a book that you could recommend for our listeners, one that has truly stuck with you over the years?
I think we had talked about sort of a business related. This guy, he's a retired Navy SEAL named Jocko Willink, an influencer, and like on Instagram and Twitter, and he always like posts photos of his watch at like 4:30 as he gets up to do these workouts. His first book, Extreme Ownership, to your hiring managers out there, hire veterans anytime you can. Doesn't matter what they did. Doesn't matter branch of service. Doesn't matter what army. I had 2 guys for the Red Army that worked for me, which was interesting. There's a lot that they're taught in terms of like owning stuff, getting stuff done, which the name escapes me. Maybe we could put it in the liner notes or look it up real quick. It's kind of like he sells his bits to businesses and whatnot. There's really one takeaway in the whole book, which helped me a lot through my journey that we just spoke about, which is that discipline is freedom. Meaning that from a business perspective, if you are super disciplined about basically everything, like getting your tasks done and like all the stuff that's kind of like boring, and you just have like a maniacal ability to like keep organized and keep moving, and kind of like rules of engagement, like whether it's like from like an incident response or something else, and you keep within that framework, then when you're inside a stressful situation or time to build, you can just kind of like let go. People that have worked with me will wonder what I'm talking about and say that I'm absolutely full of bullcrap, because me practicing that and living that is different than the inspiration of it.
Discipline is freedom. I love that. Even for my team at Harrison Clark, we talk about this a lot. We don't believe in, it's a cliche, but we don't believe in motivation or being motivated. One thing that one of my team members, Dan, says all the time is when you get up in the morning on a Monday, you don't say, I have to go to work. You say, I get to go to work, right? It's this mindset shift from how you look at the work that you have to do. There are so many tasks that are, as you describe them, mundane and boring and tedious, but being consistent with them and following through is it's imperative to success.
Yeah.
Follow-ups and all these little tiny bits that don't kind of paint the whole picture, but they're important for the end result.
Being rigorous isn't necessarily being boring. It's just giving you the flexibility to execute when you need to, and you don't have to worry about all the little things. So that's my business book. It's kind of cheesy. Like some
I love
people
it.
might think it's cheesy, but it's definitely one that's
No, it's one of my favorites so far. I haven't read it. I'm definitely going to pick it up.
Yeah.
That's one of my favorites so far. Jonathan, it was a pleasure. You brought a very unique insight into a very different picture of what happens inside Silicon Valley. A viewpoint from an early employee who saw an opportunity and their talent and skill, but more importantly, their hard work, ethics, and that mindset, that grit that we all talk about. I want to congratulate you on everything. It's phenomenal. You've been a great inspiration, and honestly, I talk about you quite a lot when I talk to engineers. It's a unique story. It's amazing. And when you were at Snowflake, you're also an incredible client to work with as well. So I appreciate that as well.
Yeah, always. Yeah, keep your good recruiters close.
Jonathan, we'll definitely catch up soon. Thank you so much. Enjoy your time off. Have a good day.
All right. Thanks a lot.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Inside the Silicon Mind. This podcast is powered by Harrison Clark. For more episodes, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell. As always, stay curious, stay consistent, and stay inside the Silicon Mind.